Welcome to the brownstone, where logic triumphs and tempers occasionally flare. Tell us where in the world you're listening. Wolfe may never leave home, but his stories travel well. Subscribe for more mysteries with Nero Wolfe and Archie Goodwin. Every good mystery deserves good company, and a little gratitude between cases. A warm thank you to Norma, our newest patron. Your support keeps the orchids blooming and the mysteries alive. Join the circle of mystery lovers on Patreon. Link in description. Nero Wolfe and the Dobermann's Last Walk. It wasn't every morning that a dog strolled into the brownstone courtyard carrying more information than a subpoena. This one, a Dobermann with muscles like braided steel cable and the expression of a man who's just been insulted by a waiter, appeared at 10:30 sharp. He dragged a blood-spotted leather leash and a silver tag that winked at me through the gate rail. Now, in my time with Wolfe, I've seen everything from veiled heiresses to weeping aldermen show up uninvited, but never a client that sniffed the hydrangeas before announcing a homicide. I watched him for a minute through the office window, coffee in hand, then went down to investigate before he decided to sample Fritz's tulips. "Hey, Kaiser, or whatever your name is," I said, squatting to read the tag. "Property of Gordon Trevelyan, Park Avenue." Below that, a phone number engraved neat enough to make a banker proud. There was a small brown smear on the clasp that didn't belong to breakfast jam. By the time I called, the connection brought more hysteria than information. A high, shaking voice cried, "Oh God, father's dog! He hasn't come home! Where is he? Where is my father?" Before I could explain that her father's canine ambassador was standing in our courtyard demanding better hospitality, the line went dead with a sob and a click. I looked at the Doberman, who looked back like he knew all about useless phone calls. "You're a good messenger," I told him. "Too bad you can't type a report." Upstairs, Wolfe was in the plant rooms, which meant the sun could have exploded, and I'd still need to wait until 11 before mentioning it. Orchid hours were sacred. 9 to 11 in the morning, 4 to 6 in the afternoon. Homicide could queue up behind fertilizer. I left Kaiser in the hall with a bowl of water and called Lon Cohen at the Gazette for a quick sniff around. Nothing yet about a dead broker, which meant, naturally, there soon would be. At 11:15 sharp, I intercepted Wolfe's descent in the elevator. He emerged like an exasperated deity returning to a less perfect planet. 6 feet of beef, brain, and ego, wrapped in yellow silk suspenders and a scowl that could curdle milk. "Archie," he intoned. I was disturbed by a barking from below. "That's not me," I said. "That's a Doberman who came calling. Name's Kaiser. His leash is bloody, his owner's missing, and I just spoke to a daughter who shrieks in high C." He stopped halfway to his desk, eyes narrowing. "Blood?" "Not tomato sauce. I'd bet a week's pay there's a corpse in the park wearing an empty collar." He grunted. "Phooey, I detest canine melodrama. Attend to the necessary." "Meaning call the cops or the next of kin?" "Meaning find out which will pay a retainer." That was Wolfe, a man who could turn compassion into arithmetic. Still, when I picked up my hat and the Doberman's leash, he didn't stop me. For him, that was practically sending flowers. By noon, Central Park had traded its morning calm for the flapping chaos of uniforms and gawkers, the smell of chestnuts mixed with gun oil, the sort of perfume that says a man's left the market permanently. The Doberman led me unerringly to a cop cordon near the sheep meadow, where a familiar red face under a rumpled fedora barked, "Goodwin! What the devil? Don't tell me Wolfe's gone into dog rescue." Inspector Kramer. The man could make the word hello sound like an indictment. "Relax, Inspector," I said. "I'm just walking a client." I nodded toward the blanket on the ground, or what's left of him. The body under the canvas was dressed like a banker's brochure, grey worsted, silk tie, cufflinks with initials GT. A hole the size of a nickel punctuated his right temple. One glance and the Doberman let out a low growl that vibrated through my knees. "That you're doing?" Kramer demanded. "Ask him." Kramer's cigar shifted sides of his mouth. "You always did have a sense of humor, Goodwin. So what's the angle? Wolfe finally diversifying into pet detective work?" "Maybe, if there's a fee." He yanked back the canvas corner. "Gordon Trevelyan, Wall Street broker, shot clean from behind. No witnesses yet, no weapon found. His daughter claims he went to walk the dog this morning." "She's half right," I said. "The dog came back." He gave me the look that usually precedes a threat of subpoena. "You talked to her?" Briefly, between sobs. Kramer snorted. You stay out of this, Goodwin, I mean it. Wolfe pokes his nose in before I close the report. I'll get a warrant so wide you can drive his orchids through it. I smiled. That's a vivid image, Inspector. I'll file it under motivation. There was one more thing. On the grass, a small dark patch and a faint indentation, as if something had fallen and been picked up in a hurry. The tie at Trevelyan's neck was slightly askew, the pin missing. Expensive suits don't go out half-dressed unless someone helps them. I crouched, pretending to straighten the leash, and spotted a glint among the damp blades, a single gold thread. When I reached for it, Kramer's voice growled, "Hands off! Evidence!" I raised my palms. "Just brushing off the dog hair, Inspector." "Save it. Beat it, Goodwin. I've got work." So did I. By the time I got Kaiser back to the brownstone, the clock chimed 1 and Fritz was materializing at the office door with lunch, veal cordon bleu that smelled good enough to convert a vegetarian. Wolfe was seated at his desk, dictionary open like an idle scripture. I gave him the digest while he ate, succinctly, because long sentences near food are hazardous. When I mentioned the name Trevelyan, he frowned. A broker. Yes, I recall the name from the financial pages. Insolent men with insolent fortunes. Continue. Dead in the park, neat hole in the skull, tie pin gone missing. Kramer's dancing with the corpse and doesn't want us cutting in. Wolfe chewed deliberately, swallowed and reached for his beer. Phooey. Dogs and capitalists both mark their territory. When one oversteps, another bites. Poetic, I said, but this bite left powder burns. He ignored that. Describe the animal. I did. Size, posture, reaction at the scene. Wolfe listened, tapping his index finger against his glass. The creature's return here suggests conditioning, he mused. It was trained to flee the sound of gunfire and seek its home. Therefore, whoever fired anticipated that instinct, or relied upon it to carry a message. You mean someone planned for the dog to deliver an alarm? Or to dispose of evidence? Blood on a leash is more portable than a pistol. That was Wolfe. Turn over a stone and find 3 layers of logic underneath. I leaned back. So, what's next, Professor? Want me to trot Kaiser past Park Avenue and see who claims him? He shook his head. Not yet. Mr. Kramer will expect such vulgar initiative. Instead, we shall await inquiry. If Miss Trevelyan is as distraught as you describe, she will soon seek counsel, preferably competent. I grinned. Meaning us. He allowed the faintest curve of mouth. Meaning me. Your contribution will be noted if it does not interfere. Thanks. I'll have that engraved on a watch band. The phone rang at that moment with the punctuality of plot. I answered. It was the debutante herself, voice brittle as spun glass. She wanted, no, demanded an appointment. Her father was dead, the police were insolent, and the papers were already sniffing. Could Mr. Wolfe please advise? I took her address, confirmed 3 o'clock, and hung up. You'll have company, boss. Miss Trevelyan, agitated, mourning, and probably rich enough to afford it. He scowled. 3 o'clock is intolerable. Orchids. She insisted. I do not accommodate insistence. You might want to start. She's got 5 million reasons and 1 dead father. He drew in a long breath, exhaled, and pulled the bell cord. Fritz appeared. Fritz, bring another glass. Mr. Goodwin requires fortification for his impertinence. Fritz smiled slightly and withdrew. I said, For a guy who won't budge an inch, you bend nice under the right kind of retainer. Wolfe's eyes flicked open lazily. Archie, your tongue will one day bankrupt you. Only if I start charging by the word. At 2:55, the doorbell sounded. Fritz admitted Miss Elaine Trevelyan, whose entrance could have paid for its own fanfare. Tall, sleek, veiled, her grief was genuine but well-tailored. The Dobermann, hearing her voice from the hallway, whined once and thumped his tail. She went straight to the dog, dropped to her knees and murmured, "Oh, Kaiser, poor boy." Then she looked up at Wolfe and me as if we were the execution committee. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, voice trembling, "I need help. They're already whispering suicide to the papers, but he would never. Kramer had called it murder already, but I didn't argue. Wolfe inclined his head. "Sit, madam. Compose yourself. Mr. Goodwin will take particulars." She perched on the edge of the red leather chair like a bird afraid of flying. Between sobs she recounted her morning, her father leaving for the walk, her attempt to call him, the dog's disappearance. Then she said something that made Wolfe's eyebrows lift half an inch. "Father hated walking the dog," she said. "He never did. He paid a man from the kennel service, but this morning he insisted on going himself." That tidbit was worth 3 beers and a monograph. I filed it mentally. "Did he receive any telephone calls prior to his departure?" Wolfe asked. "Yes, around 9. I overheard him say, 'I'll come myself, no need for delivery.' A red herring? Possibly. Or the scent of something more than dog." Wolfe nodded slowly. "Miss Trevelyan, we shall examine the matter. Mr. Goodwin will communicate with you this evening." She left her card, a faint perfume of lilac trailing in the air. When the door shut, Wolfe muttered, "Lilac. Not Mrs. Trevelyan's fragrance, I presume." "Not unless the wife's been haunting perfume counters," I said. He reached for the bell cord again. "Fritz, take the dog to the kitchen for nourishment. Mr. Goodwin, you may type a memorandum. I shall deliberate." I looked at him. "You're sure you don't want me to walk the dog again, see if he finds another corpse?" His eyes narrowed. "You will stay within civilized limits, Archie." "Always do," I said, "except when I don't." He grunted. "Phooey." That, from Nero Wolfe, was practically affection. I went to my desk, rolled in paper, and began typing while he sat immobile, eyes half closed. The Dobermann's nails clicked faintly on the floorboards as Fritz led him out. Outside, Manhattan hummed with traffic and money. Inside, the air was thick with orchids and speculation. Wolfe finally spoke, low and deliberate. "The leash is a declaration. Someone wished the dog to return and bear witness. But to what? Guilt or innocence?" I said, "Let's find out before he brings us the next one." He opened his eyes. "Archie." "Yeah?" "Do not, under any provocation, let Kramer see that animal again until we are retained." "Meaning I'm walking a 4-legged piece of evidence?" "Meaning," he said, rising ponderously, "you will secure both the creature and your discretion. I will attend the orchids." He moved toward the elevator, the day's weight creaking under him like old wood. I watched him vanish behind the brass grill, then looked at the empty chair, the half-typed page, and the faint paw print Kaiser had left on the rug. Some cases start with a scream, some with a telegram. Ours began with a leash and a Doberman who didn't know he'd delivered a murder. And that, I thought, was one hell of a walk. Park Avenue at 3 in the afternoon can look like civilization polished to a shine, the kind of shine that blinds you to where the fingerprints are. When I stepped out of the cab in front of the Trevelyan building, a doorman in brass buttons gave me the once-over as if I'd arrived to repossess the furniture, instead of ask a few polite questions about a corpse. The lobby smelled of beeswax and blue blood, quiet, expensive, and a little tired of itself. Elaine Trevelyan's penthouse ate the top 2 floors and digested them into marble, glass, and beige. Everything gleamed, but nothing lived. A maid in black serge showed me into a sitting room that could have doubled as a department store display for morning chic. Silver ashtrays unused, crystal decanters untouched, and a grand piano shut tight as a banker's mouth. Miss Trevelyan sat on the edge of a cream-coloured sofa clutching a framed photograph of the Dobermann Kaiser. She looked 22 and dressed like Park Avenue's idea of grief. Black crepe, pearls, and lipstick 1 shade short of regret. Her hands trembled, but not enough to smudge the manicure. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, rising halfway. "You saw him. You saw my father." "Only the part that wasn't moving," I said gently. "I'm sorry, Miss Trevelyan. I figured you'd want facts, not fairy tales." She swallowed, then sat back down, twisting the photo toward me. "He loved that dog. It's unbearable thinking Kaiser saw it happen." I kept my face respectful, though the idea of a Doberman testifying in court had its comic possibilities. "You said on the phone your father never walked him himself." "Never," she insisted. "He paid the kennel to send a man. Father hated the park, said it was full of idlers and dogs without pedigrees." "Then how come the leash had his initials stamped on it?" Her eyes flickered. "It was a gift. He'd never even used it. The man from the kennel must have—" She stopped, realizing the hole she'd dug. I let the silence hang until she shifted in discomfort. "Sure," I said easily. "The hired help borrowed the boss's monogram. Happens all the time." A voice behind me said, "That's enough, Elaine." Milton Cass had entered quietly, the way men do who like hearing their own entrances. He was in his 40s, narrow-shouldered, with hair combed so flat it might have been lacquered. The smell of expensive pomade arrived 3 seconds before his handshake. "I'm Milton Cass," he said, "Gordon's partner. Miss Trevelyan's in no state for interrogation." "Then it's lucky I'm only asking questions," I told him. He gave me a lawyer's smile without the license. "Inspector Kramer already took her statement. There's nothing more to add." "Probably true," I said, "but Inspector Kramer and I read from different hymnals. I like to check the verses he skips." Cass's expression didn't change, but his knuckles whitened on the chair back. "You work for that? Detective? Wolfe?" "That's right. I keep him updated between orchids." Before Cass could reply, a voice floated in from the hallway, sweet, trembling, and faintly theatrical. "Elaine, darling, is that another policeman?" Mrs. Trevelyan swept in like a memory of the Ziegfeld follies that refused to retire. She wore a silk dressing gown and pearls too large to be real, but too convincing to be innocent. Her eyes were the kind that had learned to weep on cue. "My husband detested police," she announced. "He said they always appeared after the damage was done." "Most people prefer them that way," I said. Cass frowned. "This isn't the time." But she was already sitting, lighting a cigarette with hands that trembled just enough to invite sympathy. "You'll find, Mr. Goodwin, was it, that Gordon was the sort who made enemies by accident. People envied him. Success attracts resentment." "That's one word for it," I said. "So does money." Elaine glared. "You have no right to suggest." I raised a hand. "Easy. I'm not suggesting anything yet. I'm just collecting the pieces before Kramer sweeps them up." At that, a new voice cut through the air. Crisp, efficient, female. "Perhaps you'd prefer accurate pieces, Mr. Goodwin." The housekeeper, Edna Brooks, stood in the doorway holding a tray of coffee. She had the tidy precision of a woman who could inventory a life by breakfast. Her uniform was immaculate, her tone was not. "Mr. Trevelyan took that dog out himself this morning," she said firmly. "I saw him." Elaine turned. "That's impossible." "I know what I saw, miss. He had on his grey topcoat and gloves, said he wanted fresh air." I watched the words land like stones in a still pond. Cass's jaw tightened, Mrs. Trevelyan blinked rapidly, and Elaine went pale. "Did he seem upset?" I asked. Brooks shook her head. "Calm. Determined, maybe. He'd been making phone calls since breakfast." "What sort of calls?" "To his office, then one to the Marquis Club. He told me not to disturb him if anyone rang back." That name stuck like a burr. The Marquis Club again, same as the matchbook Kramer had mentioned. "Thanks, Miss Brooks," I said. "If anyone tries to tidy up papers before the police finish, stop them." Cass bristled. "That's outrageous." "Sure," I said. "But sometimes outrage keeps things where they belong." I turned to Elaine. "May I see your father's study?" She hesitated, looked to Cass for approval, then nodded. Down the hall. The study was the only room that looked used. Papers lay in orderly stacks, pens aligned like soldiers. On the coat draped across the chair, I noticed a faint scent. Lilac, subtle and wrong. Mrs. Trevelyan's perfume, I remembered from the living room, was gardenia. I made a note in my head and kept my hands to myself. Kramer's lecture about evidence was still fresh. A silver cigar box sat open on the desk, empty. On the blotter, an impression from a removed sheet hinted at a note or letter. Behind me, Cass said, "Are you quite finished?" "Not yet," I said. "You wouldn't happen to know why a man allergic to exercise took his dog walking alone?" Cass's lips thinned. "You're implying." "Implying's free. Proof costs extra." He moved closer. "You're trespassing on grief, Goodwin. Have some decency." "Decency I've got. What I'm short on is patience. If you want me out, call the police. Otherwise I'll take a polite look around and be on my way." Elaine appeared in the doorway, calmer now. "Mr. Goodwin, please. Let him be." I nodded. "Fine. But if you remember anything odd about his mood or calls, ring me at Nero Wolfe's. He charges by the hour. I charge by the bruise." Cass muttered something under his breath that sounded like charlatan, but I was already halfway to the elevator. By the time I hit street level, the afternoon sun was glaring like a detective with nothing left to prove. I flagged a cab and headed back downtown, filing away impressions. A daughter defensive, a partner hostile, a wife performing grief, and a housekeeper who dropped a truth like a time bomb. When I reached the brownstone, it was 4:05, orchid hour. I found Wolfe in the plant rooms amid a jungle of colour and humidity. He was coaxing a stubborn phalaenopsis into compliance while Theodore Horstman hovered nearby with a misting bottle. Without turning, Wolfe said, "You are late." "Traffic, boss," and murderers who talk too slow. He made a sound halfway between a sigh and a growl. "Report." I gave him the précis, the family, the contradictions, and the lilac scent. He listened, eyes closed, hands folded over his immense middle. When I finished, he opened one eye. "Lilac," he said thoughtfully. "Not the wife's fragrance?" "No, unless she's diversified." You perceived correctly. The implication is intimate contact shortly before death." "Maybe he brushed against someone in the elevator," I suggested. He waved a dismissive hand. "Nonsense. Perfume clings only through proximity or intention. The former suggests familiarity, the latter, design." "Meaning somebody wanted him smelling like the wrong woman?" "Precisely." He reached for the bell cord, tugged once. Fritz appeared as if conjured, bearing a tray with 2 chilled glasses of beer. Wolfe passed me one. "Your wit, Archie, is frequently unserviceable, yet occasionally germane," he said. "You have earned refreshment." "That's almost praise," I said. "I'll frame it." He sipped, considering. "The dog's return remains instructive. Such training is not incidental, it implies rehearsal. Therefore, Trevelyan's death was neither random nor impulsive." "Somebody planned the whole walk," I said. "Probably the same somebody who swapped his leash for a bullseye." Wolfe nodded. "Kramer will confiscate the Trevelyan papers by tomorrow. You will go tonight, acquire copies of all financial documents you can locate, and deliver them here. Avoid confrontation. I'll bring Saul for company, if you must, but no heroics, and no attempts to charm the heiress. She's not my type." He opened both eyes now, the faintest hint of amusement flickering. "Your type, Archie, is distressingly inclusive." I grinned. "Flattery will get you a report by midnight." "See that it does." He leaned back, eyes closing again, the orchids reclaiming his attention. "The scent of lilac, a trained Dobermann, and a broker's vanity," he murmured. "Somewhere among them lies purpose." I drained the beer, set the glass down, and stretched. "You think Kramer's going to like us raiding his evidence locker in advance?" "Kramer," Wolfe said serenely, "never likes us, yet he remains grateful afterward. That is the paradox of competence." "Fine," I said. "I'll make it quick." He opened one eye. "And Archie, exercise prudence. I've grown accustomed to your impertinence, and I would regret replacing it." That was Wolfe's idea of affection, dry, formal, and oddly touching. I grabbed my hat. "Don't worry. If anyone shoots at me, I'll duck behind my charm." He grunted. "Phooey." By the time I hit the stoop, the city was sliding into evening, lights blooming like secrets on every corner. Somewhere uptown, a girl cried for her father, a Doberman slept off its adventure, and a faint trace of lilac floated through my memory, an unanswered question with a pleasant fragrance and a nasty sting. Next morning at 10:48, the phone rang, and I knew by the sound it was going to smell of tobacco and municipal authority. Some calls carry their own cologne. "Goodwin," I said. Kramer's voice came through with its usual sandpaper charm. "Tell Wolfe I'm coming over. And for once, keep the front door unlocked." "That'll be a treat for Fritz," I said. "He likes surprises before lunch." "He can file a complaint," Kramer grunted and hung up. When Wolfe descended from the plant rooms 15 minutes later, the elevator groaned as though protesting the extra weight of disapproval he carried. He crossed to his desk, unfolded the Morning Gazette, and muttered, "Inspector Kramer's manner suggests indigestion of conscience." "He's on his way," I told him. "Says to keep the door open. That's progress. Last time he came with a warrant." "Phooey, the constabulary suffers from chronic mistrust." Wolfe adjusted the position of his beer glass exactly 1 inch to the left. "Did you remind Fritz about the Sauerbraten?" "Of course. It'll be ready at 1, unless Kramer wants a plate." "He will not," Wolfe said. "He regards appetite as evidence of guilt." The bell rang at 11:10. I opened the door and Kramer came in, hat in hand but cigar already lit. He looked as if he'd been chasing suspects since dawn and found only donuts. "Morning, Inspector," I said. "You're early for lunch and late for civility." "Cut it, Goodwin." He stomped into the office, leaving a trail of blue smoke that made the air look guilty. Wolfe, I figured I'd spare us both the dance. Trevelyan was under investigation by the SEC. Insider trading, market manipulation, the works. His partner Cass swears he was clean. Wolfe inclined his head without rising. I appreciate brevity, Inspector. It spares me the torment of conjecture. Kramer parked himself in the red leather chair like a man sitting on a grievance. You're not on this case, Wolfe, but I can smell your footprints. That Dobermann showed up here first thing yesterday. Don't deny it. I do not deny facts, Wolfe said smoothly. The animal wandered in. Mr. Goodwin extended courtesy, that is all. Kramer's eyes narrowed. You're not hired, but you're nosing. Wolfe's lips twitched. I cannot be accused of olfaction without evidence, I grinned. He means you need a warrant for sniffing, Inspector. Kramer rolled his eyes toward me. If that tongue of yours ever slips, Goodwin, I'll have it entered into evidence. Fine, I said, but it's not housebroken. He ignored me and leaned forward. It wouldn't be our last time hearing that name. Midtown joint, I said. Expensive drinks, cheap conversation. Brokers go there to remember what fun looks like. Kramer grunted. We're checking it. Cass says Trevelyan stopped going months ago. Maybe he went back for company. Female company? I asked. You're thinking chorus girl. Maybe. Maybe blackmail. He jabbed the air with his cigar. You know anything about a woman named Dawn? Lila Dawn, I said. Sings at the Marquis. I've heard of her. Voice like butter and morals like margarine. Kramer shot me a look but didn't contradict it. She's on our list. Wolfe was silent, fingers steepled. Then, the Marquis Club. Yes, that was the venue printed on a matchbook in the police report, was it not? Kramer blinked. You've seen the report? Not directly. Mr. Goodwin reads between lines remarkably well. Yeah, I said, and sometimes under them. Kramer's glare shifted back to me. If you're holding out, I'll— Inspector, Wolfe interrupted sharply. I would thank you to keep your threats concise. My assistant neither withholds nor purloins evidence. His talents are entirely above board, however irreverent. That was Wolfe defending me, his version of a father patting a son's shoulder without dropping the newspaper. Kramer grunted but subsided. All right, he said finally. Maybe you two can save me some time. What's your angle? Wolfe took a long breath. None yet. Mr. Trevelyan's death may be entangled with finance, fidelity, or folly. Until I'm engaged professionally, I shall abstain from inquiry. Kramer barked a laugh. Abstain? You couldn't abstain from a puzzle if it came gift-wrapped in boredom. I said, He's right, boss. You've got the curiosity of a cat with a subscription to Scientific American. Wolfe turned to me, heavy-lidded. Archie, your similes grow increasingly grotesque. Practice, I said. Kramer rose, brushing ash from his sleeve. Fine. Keep your distance. But if you hear anything from that Trevelyan girl or her mother, you call me first. I will consider it, Wolfe said. You'll do it, Kramer shot back. Then softer. Off the record. Cass looks too clean. Either he's hiding something or he's next. That was Kramer's version of trust. Hand you the grenade and hope you don't pull the pin. He started toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Goodwin? Yeah? Tell that mutt of yours to stay out of sight. We don't need headlines about the Dobermann that fetched murder. I smiled. Too late. I already sold the rights. Kramer groaned, jammed the cigar back between his teeth and left, trailing irritation down the hall. When the door closed, Wolfe exhaled through his nose like a steam engine winding down. He is less odious when he restrains himself. That was restraint, I said. If he ever gets friendly, we'll need helmets. Wolfe ignored me, tapping a finger on the arm of his chair. An empty matchbook, a club favoured by financiers, Miss Dawn, an entertainer of uncertain virtue. I said, add one dead broker, and we've got a full orchestra. He gave me a look that could wither bravado at 50 paces. You will not visit that club. Understood. He nodded once. Excellent. I waited a beat, except to find out what Cass lied about. He sighed. Archie, come on, boss. You want a clean report? Kramer's already seen the matchbook. If I don't look, Lon Cohen will, and you'll hate reading about it in the Gazette. For a long moment he studied me, weighing irritation against necessity. Finally he said, Very well. You may go, discreetly, and without befriending another Doberman. I grinned. That depends who's on the leash. He pulled the bell cord. Fritz appeared, immaculate as always. "Fritz, lunch at 1. Mr. Goodwin may not return in time. Do not delay the Sauerbraten." "Of course, sir." When Fritz vanished, Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes. "Archie, do not provoke Kramer further. He has the patience of a bull and the memory of an elephant." "I'll be diplomatic," I said, "like a cobra with manners." He opened one eye. "Pfui." I grabbed my hat, feeling the pleasant tingle that comes when Wolfe says don't. The Marquis Club waited, smelling of gin, gossip, and bad intentions. Behind me, Wolfe was already motionless, thinking, while I went out to stir the part of Manhattan where thinking usually got you in trouble. Some joints wear their sins like perfume, and the Marquis Club was one of them. The sign outside blinked between crimson and blue, spelling Marquis when it worked, and Mar-US when it didn't. Inside, the air was thick enough to butter toast and smelled of gin, cigars, and bad decisions with good lighting. The hostess gave me a look that filed me under possible tab payer, then waved me toward the piano. That's where I found Lila Dawn, crooning through a tune about love and other temporary arrangements. She was the kind of blonde who'd been 28 for 3 years and made it a profession. The spotlight brushed over her sequin dress like it was getting ideas it couldn't afford. When she finished, she slid onto the stool beside me with the ease of someone used to being followed by eyes, bills, and mistakes. "You're new here," she said, voice low and smoky. "I get around," I told her, "mostly in the company of homicide." Her lips curved. "Cops?" "Private citizenship. Nero Wolfe, licensed to think. Archie Goodwin, licensed to pay the cover charge." She laughed, a brittle sound that didn't reach her eyes. "You're the one who found Gordon." "Found, yes. Solved, not yet." The smile faded. "He shouldn't have gone to the park. He hated dirt." "So I've heard. Maybe he had business with nature." She leaned in. "He had business with Cass, that snake, but Gordon couldn't prove it. The dog thing, they used it to pass messages, codes, I don't know. He told me once the kennels were only half about dogs." I kept my face calm while the orchestra started up again with a slow number. "Half about what, then?" "Money," she whispered. "And paper. Bonds, I think. Bearer ones." He said it like I'd understand. That was a fair overestimation of her resume, but I nodded gravely. "You dated him?" "For a while." She looked away, lighting a cigarette that trembled just enough to seem deliberate. "He was charming until he wasn't. Thought he owned people like he owned stocks. Then he got scared." "Scared of what?" "Letters," she said. "Someone wrote him, said they'd expose the whole kennel operation unless he paid up." "Who wrote them?" Her eyes narrowed. "You think I'd tell you? Gordon never said." "Maybe because it was you." That earned me a laugh with claws. Darling, if I'd blackmailed Gordon Trevelyan, I wouldn't still be singing for rent money. "Some people like to keep busy," I said. She gave me a look that was equal parts amusement and warning. "You're lucky you're handsome, Goodwin. It makes up for being stupid." I smiled. "That line works better before the bill arrives." She blew smoke at the ceiling. "Ask Cass about the silver stag." "The what?" She shook her head. "You'll figure it out." The band struck up a livelier tune, and a few couples drifted onto the dance floor. I pulled out a 5 and left it under the edge of her glass. As I rose, she caught my hand. Her nails were polished the colour of strategy. "You didn't hear it from me," she said, slipping something into my pocket. But Cass had a reason to keep Gordon quiet. Then she turned away, all elegance and exit cues. Outside, the night had cooled into a drizzle that made the neon smear like oil paint. I ducked under an awning and fished out the item she'd planted. A folded cocktail napkin with lipstick and 3 words in blue pencil. "Don't trust Cass." For a woman who sang torch songs, she had a flair for understatement. I caught a cab back to West 35th Street. The brownstone windows glowed like patient eyes, and Fritz let me in with his usual nod that meant he disapproved of nightlife in general, and mine in particular. The clock on Wolfe's desk read 9:20. He was reading, surrounded by the faint hum of order that always made me feel like I'd just tracked mud across the universe. "You're late," he said without looking up. "I brought culture," I told him, hanging my hat. "Also possibly blackmail." He marked his place with a ribbon and set the book aside. "Proceed." I gave him the full rundown: Lila, the kennel gossip, the bearer bonds, and Cass's name in capital letters. He listened without interruption, except for one raised eyebrow when I quoted her line about me being handsome. When I finished, he grunted. The intersection of canine breeding and fiduciary breeding, he said. A sordid cross-pollination. This city breeds corruption as assiduously as it breeds dogs. That's poetic, but unhelpful, I said. Want me to check the kennels or the club again? He frowned. Neither until we ascertain the author of those blackmail letters. You say their phrasing was literate. According to Lila, yes. She thought it was someone educated. He nodded. Miss Dawn is unlettered but observant. That detail is telling. Blackmailers of refinement are rarer than orchids in Iceland. That's your kind of rare. Phooey. One does not admire rot because it is unique. I pulled the napkin from my pocket and set it on his desk. Souvenir. She slipped it to me. He leaned forward, squinting. Don't trust Cass. How original. Maybe she's sincere. Or complicit. He rang the bell cord. Fritz appeared silently, bearing 2 glasses of beer on a tray. Wolfe accepted his with reverence. Thank you, Fritz. Dinner at 8 precisely. Yes, sir. Fritz departed, leaving domestic perfection in his wake. I took my glass. So, what's next? Wait for Cass to hang himself or shove the stool under him? Neither. Wolfe sipped. We observe. Miss Dawn's remark about the kennels intrigues me. Dogs used as couriers for bearer bonds. Improbable but possible. Their obedience ensures discretion. Not if the bonds bark. He ignored me. Tomorrow, you will visit the kennel facility registered to Trevelyan's partnership. Make inquiries. Casually. Casually meaning legally? Preferably, but I rely on your discretion. Good thing you trust me more than Lila trusts Cass. That remains to be seen. He leaned back, eyes half closed, satisfied to end the world on his own punctuation mark. Archie, refrain from further fraternization with chanteuses. They dull your judgment. Sure, I said, and you stay away from orchids. They're just flowers with better PR. He opened one eye. Impertinent. Accurate, he sighed, which for Wolfe was equivalent to applause. Very well. Report tomorrow before lunch. And Archie, exercise prudence. Always do, I said. Then prove it. I finished my beer, set it down and stood. The orchids waited upstairs. Fritz was already tuning the kitchen for dinner, and Wolfe had retreated into his thoughts. Outside, the rain thickened. I looked at the napkin again before folding it into my notebook. Lila Dawn might be a liar, Cass might be clean, and the whole dog racket might be just another New York mirage. But somebody had fired a bullet into Gordon Trevelyan's head, and I intended to find the hand that squeezed the trigger. I turned off the light, leaving Wolfe alone with his orchids and his contempt for the human species, and went upstairs to start the report he'd pretend not to read. Rain was doing its best to convince Manhattan it had made a bad investment in spring. By 10 that night, the brownstone windows wore streaks of light and shadow, and the office smelled of damp wool and hot coffee. The only thing dry in the room was Wolfe's patience, and even that was starting to wilt. Saul Pantzer sat across from me at the work table, sleeves rolled, cigarette dangling, turning the pages of Gordon Trevelyan's financial ledgers with the reverence some men reserve for scripture. We'd spent the last hour in a brokerage back office persuading a nervous clerk to run photostats. Clean, sequential, and stamped. The originals stayed right where the law left them. Beside him lay 3 more volumes, each with tabs and pencil marks like scars from a careful battle. The rain drummed against the glass in sync with the sound of our pencils. Some bookkeeping, Saul muttered. Guy's got kennels, bond accounts, and 3 different ways of spelling Zurich. He probably thought it was a flavour, I said. From behind his desk, Wolfe made a noise halfway between a sigh and a sermon. Gentlemen, restraint. Flippancy dulls perception. I looked up. So does boredom, and this has enough zeros to sedate a horse. We've got kennel entries cross-listed with bank codes. Who keeps a spaniel named Mercantile Trust of Geneva? Saul smirked. Maybe it fetches interest. I almost applauded. Wolfe didn't. He leaned forward, eyes sharp. The kennel names are not whimsical. They are cover terms. The association between Silver Stag Kennels and the Trevelyan Trust suggests transfer of bearer bonds under a cipher. Silver Stag, I repeated. That's the tie-pin missing from Trevelyan's corpse. Indeed. He steepled his fingers. Symbolism is not coincidence, Archie. It is confession disguised as ornament. Saul exhaled. That had fit the rumour from the brokerage floor. Trevelyan and Cass moved funds through animal registries, dogs as account numbers. Phooey, Wolfe said softly. The world breeds wealth as others breed spaniels. Carelessly, for show. I jotted a note on the pad. So, the kennel's our laundromat, and Silver Stag's the wash cycle. The phone rang before Wolfe could correct my metaphor. He gestured imperiously. I picked it up. Brownstone Kennels, obedience classes on request, I said. Kramer's growl came back like thunder through static. Cut the cute, Goodwin. Goodwin, tell Wolfe to quit dancing. Somebody's leaking me duplicate ledger pages that smell like his cigars. If you two are running photostats behind my back, I want the chain of custody now. I shot Saul a grin. Inspector, that's flattering, but our olfactory radius ends at the property line. Don't get smart, Kramer barked. I'm calling in Stebbins to trace who checked them out. If I find your fingerprints, you'll invite me to lunch? Wolfe lifted a hand. I passed the receiver. Inspector, he said smoothly, your talent for suspicion exceeds your resources. Mr. Goodwin and I are occupied with weathering the deluge. Yeah? You'll be weathering subpoenas if those books don't reappear. I had a chain of custody tighter than a safe, and now they vanish? Somebody had inside help. That is not within my knowledge, Wolfe said. Nor my concern, yet. Kramer grunted. Don't play coy. You know damn well those ledgers tie to the Marquis Club. Cass's secretary swears Trevelyan ordered photostats. If I find out you've got them— Inspector, Wolfe interrupted. You will find duplication without displacement, Inspector. No custody was breached. Good evening. He replaced the receiver with the delicacy of a man handling an orchid stem. Saul raised an eyebrow. He's gonna blow. He is incapable of explosion, Wolfe said. He simmers. That is his métier. I leaned back. You sure you want to needle him while sitting on the merchandise? He ignored the jab. Mr. Pantzer, continue transcribing the ciphered entries. The rain is conducive to clarity. Mr. Goodwin, attend me. I joined him at the desk, where he had the top ledger open under the lamp. In the margin, neat columns of letters ran beside numbers. A, Silver Stag, B, Blue Hound, C, Argent Kennel. Note, he said, tapping the page, the sequential deposits correspond to dates of kennel registrations. The Silver Stag entry occurs repeatedly in late February. That's about when Trevelyan started getting those blackmail letters, I said. Lila Dawn said so. Then the extortionist was aware of these records, ergo one of the initiates, Cass, or a clerk with access. Saul said, or the kennel manager. Perhaps. Wolfe closed the book and leaned back, eyes half-lidded. Money and breeding, Mr. Goodwin, are twin pursuits, both requiring selection, control, and deceit. The upper classes merely disguise their kennels as offices. Nice line, I said. How many bone metaphors per minute are we up to? He gave me a look over the rims of his lids. Flippancy is your armor against thought. Remove it sparingly. Saul chuckled. He's got you pegged, Archie. Sure, I said. And you can be the leash. The thunder outside cracked so loud the lights flickered. Fritz's voice drifted faintly from the hall, muttering in Swiss about electrical bills and divine judgment. Wolfe sighed. A storm, an inspector, and a ledger. The triumvirate of nuisance. The phone rang again. I reached for it, but Wolfe gestured. Let it ring thrice. To answer too quickly suggests guilt. It rang twice, then stopped. Wolfe smirked faintly. Kramer's patience lasts precisely 2 rings. Saul stubbed out his cigarette. You want me to keep the ledgers here or move them to a safer kennel? Here, Wolfe said. Within these walls they are under inviolable jurisdiction. Mine. Besides, the police will waste days chasing procedural tales. Dogged tenacity of officialdom, I said. That's one more metaphor. You'll have to file for a kennel license. Archie. His tone was a warning. I raised both hands. Sorry, couldn't resist. You set them up too easy. He closed his eyes, humming a few bars of Handel. Saul and I exchanged looks, the kind that meant the old man's thinking. After 3 measures, he stopped abruptly. The Silver Stag, he murmured, an emblem of pursuit and rarity. Yet here it is, repeated, mechanical, not the vanity of a criminal mind, but the signature of a system. Meaning what? I asked. Meaning, he said slowly, this was not blackmail. It was embezzlement disguised as blackmail. A shell game between partners until fear upset the balance. Saul whistled softly. Cass and Trevelyan were splitting it? Possibly, until Cass sought monopoly. I stood. That's a solid theory. Want me to check Cass's office before Kramer beats me there? He opened one eye. At midnight, during a thunderstorm? Adds atmosphere. Adds pneumonia, he said dryly. No, you will remain until morning. Mr. Pantzer will guard the ledgers. I shall compose a memorandum. He pushed back from the desk, reached for the bell cord, and tugged once. Fritz appeared with uncanny timing, bearing a tray with 3 small glasses. Cognac, Wolfe said, for fortitude. Fritz poured and withdrew. The rain softened, drumming steadier now, like a heartbeat behind glass. Wolfe lifted his glass. To diligence, Saul nodded. And luck. I raised mine. And may Kramer never find our kennel. Wolfe's eyes glinted. He will, inevitably. But by then, Archie, we shall have bred him a better bone to chew. I took a sip, savouring the burn. The storm outside had lost its roar, but the kind inside the brownstone was just getting warmed up. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that money can make even the smell of wet dogs seem distinguished. The Manhattan Kennel Association was proof. The lobby looked like it had been designed by a man who loved marble and hated moderation. White pillars, gilt-framed portraits of dogs that probably had better pedigrees than their owners, and the faint medicinal perfume of disinfectant and pride. I signed in at the reception desk, where a girl with hair as stiff as her smile took my card as if it might bite. "Mr. Goodwin, is it? You're expected in the East Wing. Mr. Deming will see you." Ralph Deming turned out to be the human equivalent of a bloodhound in a tuxedo, jowly, wary, and bred to sniff for profit. He met me in a room lined with glass trophies and kennel charts that read like blue blood registries. "So, you're the fellow working for Nero Wolfe," he said, shaking my hand with a grip that tested bones for integrity. "We've already spoken with the police." "Good," I said. "They're a fine audience. I prefer a private show." He didn't smile. "This isn't a social club, Mr. Goodwin." "No," I said, glancing at the portraits. "The clientele's better groomed." That got me a glare. "You wanted to know about the Silver Stag, never heard of it." "Strange," I said. "It's the kennel name listed in Trevelyan's ledgers, the one attached to certain overseas transfers." He stiffened. "We run a reputable organization." "Reputation's like a leash," I said. "Handy until someone yanks it." The door opened then, and a woman entered with the calm assurance of someone used to patching up both dogs and men. Dr. Vera Lang. She had a white coat, grey eyes, and the kind of composure that made you wonder if she kept spare hearts in her desk drawer. "Mr. Deming," she said coolly, "you're needed in the registration office." Deming shot me a look that said, "Don't chew the furniture," and left. I turned to her. "You must be the in-house miracle worker." "Veterinarian," she corrected. "You're Mr. Goodwin." "Guilty." Her mouth quirked. "I've heard you have a conversational style." "That's one way to describe it. Another is an unfortunate habit of asking questions. I prefer men who listen." "So does my employer," I said. "That's why he keeps me around, keeps things unpredictable." She crossed to a filing cabinet and began rearranging folders. "You wanted information on Trevelyan's Dobermann?" "Right. Kaiser. Fine specimen, I'm told." "Was," she said. "He died 2 weeks ago." I blinked. "You're sure?" "Quite. Heart failure. I supervised the autopsy." "That's funny," I said, "because I saw him 3 days ago, alive and well, dragging a leash into my boss's courtyard." Her hands froze on the drawer. Slowly she turned. "You must be mistaken." "I've made mistakes before," I said, "but usually they buy me dinner first." She exhaled. "If that's true, then the dog Trevelyan had at the end wasn't the one I examined." "Swapped." She nodded reluctantly. "There was a discrepancy. I noticed it weeks ago when the dog came in for shots. The scar on the left ear was gone." "Maybe it healed." "Not that well," she said. "It was surgical, not accidental." I leaned on the desk. "And you didn't tell Trevelyan?" "I did." He dismissed it, said I was imagining things. She hesitated. He seemed frightened. I thought perhaps someone was threatening him. Someone was, I said, with a bullet, and Cass looked next in line. Her composure slipped. You think it's connected? I think in this city coincidences are as rare as honest expense reports. Deming reappeared, frowning. Dr. Lang, I thought you had another appointment. She closed the cabinet. I was just finishing. He turned to me. If you're quite done. Almost, I said. One more thing. You ever register a kennel under the name Silver Stag? No, he said flatly. Then you won't mind if I check your archives. He spread his hands. That's private property. Sure, I said. So are bearer bonds. He flushed. You're implying. I'm implying nothing. Yet. That earned me an escort to the door. Vera's eyes followed me, calm but uncertain. As I left, she slipped something into my hand. A folded index card. I didn't look at it until I was outside, under the awning. It read, Check Trevelyan's kennel files. Kaiser number 27 replaced April 3rd. The drizzle had started again, soft enough to make the sidewalk shine. I caught a cab uptown and made it back to West 35th just as the clock in the hall chimed 4, orchid hour. Fritz let me in with a towel and the look of a man who disapproved of any weather not found in Switzerland. Wolfe was upstairs, of course, tending to his vegetable harem. I waited in the office, typing up notes until the elevator hummed and he appeared, broad, precise, and faintly floral. Report, he said. I gave it to him straight, the kennel, Deming, the vet, and the note. When I reached the part about the dog swap, he stopped me with a raised hand. Repeat that, he said. The vet says the Dobermann Trevelyan owned wasn't the original Kaiser. The real one died weeks before. He frowned. A substitution. For what purpose? Maybe the replacement came with a bonus feature. The vet hinted it was deliberate. Wolfe leaned back, fingertips touching. A courier, then. Messages concealed in collars, perhaps microfilm. Ingenious and dangerous. Dogs as messengers, I said. Safer than telegraphs and harder to bribe. He gave me a sideways look. Your levity persists, but your inference is sound. The kennel served as an exchange hub. Whoever controlled the dogs controlled the traffic. Deming and Cass, maybe, but Trevelyan got scared. Precisely. He tugged at his chin. Mr. Cass's death was therefore expedient, not coincidental, and the missing blotter, possibly used to wrap an object small and flat. Microfilm again, I said. Could be. Could be indeed. He rose, signalling the conversation was done. Mr. Goodwin, your diligence is admirable, though your method, flirting mid-inquiry, is lamentable. I grinned. She talked, didn't she? At cost to my digestion, he said severely. Your instincts are commendable but misdirected. So's gravity, I said. It keeps pulling me back into trouble. He grunted, Wolfe for a laugh, and reached for the bell cord. Fritz, beer, he called when Fritz appeared in the doorway. Fritz vanished again, reappearing moments later with 2 frosted glasses. Wolfe lifted his like a priest at benediction, to persistence, however misapplied. I clinked mine. To orchids with better manners than their owner. He closed his eyes in mild agony. Archie. Yeah, I said. I'll type it up before dinner. Outside, the rain thickened, and somewhere downtown another kennel ledger waited to spill its secrets. The storm hadn't let up, a full-blooded Manhattan tantrum with lightning slicing the sky and rain hammering the windows like a bill collector. Inside the brownstone, the only thunder allowed was Wolfe's opinion, and that was bad enough. He was at his desk, dictating notes in the kind of calm voice that could make a firing squad look undisciplined, while I typed with the noble patience of a man earning his keep 1 keystroke at a time. At 11:40, the bell rang. Fritz had already retreated to the kitchen to guard dinner from humidity, so I went to the door. On the stoop, framed by the downpour, was Elaine Trevelyan, hatless, soaked and furious enough to make a preacher swear. She swept past me like I was part of the furniture and planted herself in the middle of Wolfe's office, dripping class and indignation in equal parts. "Mr. Wolfe," she snapped, "you will stop this outrage immediately." Wolfe didn't move, didn't even blink. He merely placed his pen in its holder and looked at her as though she'd interrupted him during an orchid inspection. which in spirit she had. "Miss Trevelyan," he said, "I commend your fortitude in defying the weather. Please sit." "I will not sit," she said, clutching her handbag like it might explode. "You've been harassing my father's associates, prying into our affairs, slandering his name. I came to tell you personally to stop." "Then you've succeeded," Wolfe said. "You've told me." Her eyes flashed. "You think this is amusing?" "Nothing about murder is amusing," he said dryly. I offered her a towel from the stand. She ignored it, which was a pity. She'd have looked good in self-restraint. The handbag she held gave off a faint tang I recognized at once. Gun oil. Not perfume, not powder. A sharper scent that didn't belong in a lady's accessories unless she was planning to start a different kind of social engagement. I filed it away and went back to my chair. "My father was an honourable man," she said, voice trembling. "He didn't deserve this circus." Wolfe leaned back. "Miss Trevelyan, your father's honour is not the subject of my inquiry. His death is. One may be unblemished in reputation and still shot neatly behind the ear. You object to that fact?" Her lips tightened. "You make it sound sordid." "It is sordid," Wolfe said. "Death by violence always is." She paced, her heels clicking sharp against the rug. "If it's money you want, name your price. I can afford to make this worth your while." I almost whistled, but Wolfe beat me to it, verbally anyway. "Phooey," he said, soft but lethal. "You presume upon my venality, Miss Trevelyan. I do not barter in silence." She opened her bag, pulled out an envelope and dropped it on his desk. $5,000. "You'll take it, close your files, and forget this case ever existed." The envelope sat there like a dead bird. Wolfe looked at it as if it had personally insulted civilization. "Miss Trevelyan," he said, "my integrity is not negotiable." For once, the thunder outside had the good manners to punctuate the line. She flushed scarlet. "You're making a mistake. You don't understand what you're meddling in." "I understand perfectly," he said. "A man is dead. Another followed. There will be no third if I can prevent it." "You arrogant," she began, then stopped, glancing toward me. "Is he always like this?" "Only when he's awake," I said. That earned me a look that could have curdled champagne. "You're mocking me." "Habit," I said, "helps me sleep." She turned back to Wolfe. "You're prying into matters far above your station." He smiled faintly. "Madam, my station is immovable. The world adjusts." For a second I thought she'd throw something, but instead she caught her breath, snatched up the envelope and stuffed it back into her bag. As she did, I caught another whiff of that gun oil. The handbag was small, too small for a revolver, but maybe large enough for ambition. She straightened. "You'll regret this," she said. "I rarely do," Wolfe replied. "Fritz will see you out." But Fritz wasn't there, and the look she gave me made it clear that escort duty was mine. She brushed past me toward the hall, perfume and tension trailing behind. At the door she turned. "You think you can outsmart the people my father dealt with? You can't. They'll crush you." "Good night, Miss Trevelyan," Wolfe said. The door closed behind her like a gavel dropping. I turned back to Wolfe, who was staring at the empty chair she'd refused to sit in. The office smelled of wet wool and defiance. "Well," I said, "that was cosy. Want me to get the mop or the bodyguard?" He didn't look up. "Miss Trevelyan is frightened." "She's also armed," I said. "Her bag smells like gun oil." That got his attention. He frowned, tapping a finger on the arm of his chair. "You're certain?" "Positive. It wasn't just residue, fresh, like she'd been cleaning something she shouldn't own." Noted. She offered $5,000 to halt my inquiry. The sum is large enough to be sincere, but not extravagant enough for the truth she's concealing. "Maybe she thinks $5,000's the market rate for silence," he snorted. "Silence is invaluable, which is why I never sell it." "Maybe you should have asked for 6, I said. He turned that glacier stare on me. "I could also have asked for your silence," I grinned. "You could, but then who'd appreciate your speeches?" That earned me the smallest flicker, call it amusement or irritation in a tuxedo. "Archie, fetch the note cards. I'll dictate." I took my place at the typewriter as he began, his voice rolling steady and deliberate against the backdrop of rain and distant thunder. He spoke of motives, of money laundering disguised as kennel investments, of Trevelyan's fear, and of a daughter who might not be the innocent mourner she pretended to be. When he finished, he leaned back and closed his eyes. "You will watch her, Archie, quietly. Women of means and conscience are prone to desperation." "Sure," I said. "I'll keep an eye on her. If she shoots me, you'll have something new to be indignant about." "Do not be flippant," he said, though the corners of his mouth threatened mutiny. "Fritz will serve dinner at 8 precisely. Until then, I wish to think." "Thinking's your department. I'll handle the digesting." "Archie." Yeah, I said, shutting down the typewriter. "I'll behave." The rain outside thickened to a steady roar. Upstairs, the orchids waited. Downstairs, Wolfe stared at the empty envelope she'd left behind on the blotter, apparently in her hurry to storm out. I sealed it and logged it. If Kramer wanted corroboration, he could have it without me repeating myself. I tucked it into a folder. "You know," I said, $5,000 could buy a lot of collars." Wolfe sighed. "And yet it cannot buy integrity." "Phooey," I smiled, turning off the lamp. "Good line, I'll frame it." The warehouse district after midnight smells like wet iron and borrowed time. The rain had let up to a greasy mist that turned the cobblestones slick and made the street lamps look like they were sweating. Saul Panzer and I were parked across from a block of corrugated metal sheds that had all the charm of a municipal morgue, and probably the same clientele. Saul checked his watch. "She said Unit 14, he murmured. His voice could hide behind cigarette smoke. "If there's anything left, it won't wait long." "Nothing good ever does," I said, pulling my coat tighter. "Let's go see if the Silver Stag left any tracks in the mud." We crossed the street. The padlock on Unit 14 was hanging loose, open like a toothless grin. Saul drew his flashlight. The beam sliced through the dark, catching motes of dust and one disappointed detective expression. Mine. The place was empty, completely. No crates, no kennels, no smuggled bonds disguised as dog chow. Just oil stains on the floor and a faint echo that might have been laughing at us. "Hell," I muttered. "Somebody's been cleaning house." Saul crouched, examining the floor. "Tire marks. 2 trucks, 1 heavy, 1 light, within the last 6 hours. 6 hours, I said. That's efficiency. They must have read Wolfe's schedule and left during orchid time." He looked up. "You think they knew we were coming?" "I think everybody in this city knows when we're coming. We don't exactly blend." "Speak for yourself," he said mildly. We did a full sweep anyway. The only thing left in the corner was a scrap of paper flattened under a boot print. I pulled it free, half a telegram stub, creased and greasy. The message fragment read, "Shipment delayed. Ask Silver Stag." "Well," I said, "at least they left a calling card." Saul took it, frowning. "No address, no origin mark. Whoever sent it knew it'd be found." "Sure," I said. "Nothing says professional like breadcrumbs." A faint noise came from the alley behind the unit, metal scraping on brick. We froze. Saul motioned left. I went right. My shoes made just enough sound to annoy me. When I rounded the corner, a figure in a slicker darted out the back gate, running for the street. I sprinted after him. He was fast, but desperation makes poor choices. He slipped on the wet pavement, skidded, and went down hard. I grabbed his collar before he could get up. His hat fell off. Thin, nervous type, maybe mid-30s, the kind of man who looked guilty even before the evidence. "Evening," I said. "You left before the party started." "Let go of me." "I like you where you are. Why don't you tell me what Silver Stag ships besides excuses?" He tried to jerk free, which was unwise. Saul appeared calm as ever, blocking the other end of the alley. The man's eyes flicked between us. "You're cops." "Worse," I said. "Private," he sagged. "I don't know anything. I was told to clear the place, that's all." "By who?" He hesitated. "A woman, blonde, said her name was Lang." That jolted Saul. "Vera Lang?" "Yeah, paid cash. Said it was dangerous to ask questions." I looked at Saul. "That's funny, she told me to come here." The man licked his lips. "Look, I'm just muscle. You think I'd stick around for this if I knew more?" "Good point," I said. "But you'll stick around long enough for Kramer to have a chat." He paled. "Cops? No." Saul cut him off. "You'll like them. They're conversational." We hauled him to the car and turned him over to the night shift at the 12th Precinct, where Kramer's men promised to keep him warm. I didn't envy them. He looked the type to spill everything except what mattered. By the time we got back to the brownstone, it was nearly 3 a.m. The city had gone quiet except for the drip of rain off awnings. Inside, the lights were still on. Wolfe was awake, naturally. The man probably considered sleep an inefficient habit. He was at his desk in his yellow silk robe, reading by lamplight, with a glass of beer sweating beside him. When we came in, he didn't look up. "Failure," he said. Saul blinked. "You knew?" He nodded. "The air of futility clings to you like mildew." "Thanks," I said. "Next time I'll wear cologne." He set down the book. "What was found?" "An empty warehouse, 2 tire tracks, and half a telegram. The rest probably went out with the trash." I handed him the stub. He took it delicately, studying the print. "Shipment delayed. Ask Silver Stag." It is deliberate misdirection, designed to occupy you while the true hand arranged Cass's death." Saul said, "Lang sent us there. Maybe she's part of it." "Perhaps," Wolfe murmured, "or perhaps she was coerced. Either way, we have been made fools." "Speak for yourself," I said, dropping into the red chair. I only rented my dignity for the evening. "Your levity is misplaced," Wolfe said. "So was the warehouse," I shot back. For a moment, the room was quiet except for the rain ticking against the glass. Then Wolfe surprised me. He leaned forward, eyes serious. "Archie?" "Yes, sir?" "I would rather lose a case than you." I blinked. "That's touching, but you're assuming I'm in the habit of being lost." He ignored that. "You pursue leads with admirable zeal, but zeal without caution invites calamity." "Meaning?" "Meaning," he said. "Next time you find an empty room, leave it empty. I will do the thinking." "Sure," I said, "and I'll bring roses to my own funeral." "Archie," his tone softened, "do not jest." That did it. For once, he wasn't playing the mountain of reason. He looked tired, almost human. It was enough to make me shut up for 5 whole seconds. Then I grinned. "You're getting sentimental, boss. Pretty soon you'll start shaking hands." He groaned. "Phooey." "Thought so." He turned to Saul. "Mr. Panther, you may retire. I thank you for your assistance." Saul nodded, collected his hat, and slipped out. When the door closed, Wolfe sighed and reached for his beer. "This," he said, "is an exercise in irritation. We have been diverted while our quarry, cleverly, removes himself from the board." "Maybe," I said, stretching, "but whoever's moving the pieces doesn't know one thing." He looked up. "And that is?" I grinned. "We cheat." That earned a snort, which from Wolfe was practically applause. He took a long pull of beer, set the glass down, and muttered, "Go to bed, Archie." "Gladly. Maybe I'll dream of a warehouse that isn't empty." As I left, the thunder rumbled again, low and distant. Wolfe stayed at the desk, a solitary figure in a sea of lamplight, the telegram stub between his fingers like a riddle he already hated knowing the answer to. The Homicide Bureau always smelled like cold coffee and postponed vacations. Noon light slanted through the grimy windows, turning the smoke haze into something you could almost chew. Kramer's office was a shrine to paperwork and cigar butts. 3 ashtrays, all full, and a file cabinet that looked like it had survived 2 wars and lost both. He was behind the desk, coat off, tie loosened, rolling a cigar between his fingers the way some men roll prayer beads. I sat opposite, pretending the chair was designed for human use. Wolfe was wedged in beside me, his bulk compressing the air into obedience. Getting him to leave the brownstone had taken persuasion bordering on blackmail, but the lure of new evidence had done the trick. Kramer didn't waste words. "All right, Wolfe. You said you wanted the blotter." He opened a folder and slid a sealed evidence bag across the desk. Inside was a square of stained paperboard, the kind that had once soaked up a lot of ink, and maybe a little conscience. "We pulled it from Cass's wastebasket this morning." Wolfe studied it like it might reveal a sonnet if stared at long enough. "You have my gratitude, Mr. Kramer. Few men could pry a single object from the bureaucratic morass of your department in under a week." Kramer grunted. "You'd be surprised what can happen when I want a quiet phone." I took the blotter out carefully. Across the surface, in ghostly mirror writing, you could see the imprint of a note, ink long gone, but pressure still visible. Wolfe leaned closer. "Archie." "Already on it," I said. I pulled a pad from my pocket and began shading the surface lightly with a pencil. Letters came up like ghosts from the grave. Can't carry this, Elaine knew, silver stag, end it myself before... I stopped. That's enough to make a stenographer faint. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Trevelyan's hand, undoubtedly. A confession begun but never finished, and implicating his daughter. Kramer snorted. You mean Elaine Trevelyan, the one who offered you a bribe to drop the case? The same, Wolfe said evenly. Well, that ties her up with a neat little bow, doesn't it? Pfui, Wolfe murmured. It ties nothing. The dead man's guilt or despair is no proof of her complicity. It may have been planted for precisely that illusion. Kramer bit down on the cigar and puffed until the smoke joined the general atmosphere. You always have to make it complicated. It is complicated, Wolfe said. Life, Mr. Kramer, is a tangle of motives straining for simplicity. That sounds like something you'd frame over your beer fridge, I said. Wolfe ignored me, which was fine. I was getting used to it. Kramer leaned back. Look, Wolfe, I'm not your enemy, but if this goes public, if that blotter's used in court, it's dynamite. The DA'll say it's suicide by confession, case closed. You won't like that any more than I will. I never like lazy conclusions, Wolfe said, nor men who mistake expedience for truth. Kramer sighed. Yeah, well, truth doesn't get me re-elected. He jabbed a thumb toward the evidence bag. Still, I brought you what you asked for. That's as far as I can stick my neck out. Your cooperation is commendable, Wolfe said. You are not often so accommodating. Don't get used to it. I have no intention to. For a moment, the two of them just stared at each other across the blotter, like rival chess masters deciding whether the next move was worth losing sleep over. It was quiet enough to hear the radiator hiss. Finally, Kramer grunted. If you weren't so damn immovable, Wolfe, you'd make a fine cop. Wolfe's mouth twitched, which for him was a broad grin. And if you weren't so mutable, Mr. Kramer, you'd make a tolerable philosopher. That earned a bark of laughter from Kramer, the first honest sound of humour I'd heard in the room all day. Hell, he said, we'll call it even. I said, Gentlemen, if this keeps up, I'll have to order drinks and call Lon Cohen for a society column. Don't push it, Goodwin, Kramer said, but there was no bite in it. He reached for the phone, then paused. One more thing. That telegram stub you sent over, shipment delayed, ask Silver Stag. We traced the print shop that handled the batch. Orders came from an outfit in Jersey registered under a shell company. You'll love the name, Trevelyan Holdings Limited. Wolfe grunted. How droll. So, your heiress has been busy, Kramer said. Or someone has been busy using her name, Wolfe replied. Fraud requires either cunning or access. We shall see which applies. Kramer rubbed his temples. You'll see it before I do, and you know it. All right, I'll hold off the DA for 48 hours. After that, I'll need something solid. You shall have it, Wolfe said. Or at least a stone suitable for throwing. He rose, slowly, like a continent deciding to shift. I stood, glad to stretch. As we turned to leave, Kramer said quietly, Wolfe. Yes? Don't let that girl hang if she's innocent. I've seen enough fathers drag their kids down with them. Wolfe paused. Nor I, Mr. Kramer. You have my word. That hung in the air a second too long, one of those rare moments where respect doesn't need witnesses. Out in the hallway, Wolfe moved with his usual deliberate pace. Archie, he said, you will make photostats of the blotter impression. Preserve the original. Sure, I said. Anything else? A medal for Kramer? He gave me a sidelong glance. Sarcasm is wasted on decency. I'm not wasting it, I said, just lending it interest. He didn't answer, which meant I'd hit the line between amusement and annoyance. I opened the door for him at street level, where the rain had stopped but left puddles big enough to drown optimism. Lunch at 1, I asked. Precisely, he said. Fritz is preparing veal. You may attend, provided you restrain your commentary. Always a privilege. As we climbed into the cab, I looked back at the precinct building, the grey block against the city glare, a place that somehow managed to keep both Justice and Wolfe from getting comfortable. In the rear seat, Wolfe exhaled deeply, closing his eyes. Kramer is an obstinate man, he said. True, I replied, but today he almost sounded like he liked you. He opened one eye. He should be more careful whom he likes. Maybe, I said, but that sounded close to a toast to me. He gave a single nod, as though the idea didn't entirely offend him. A toast, then. He reached into his coat, found nothing, and frowned. Beer at home will suffice, I grinned, and I'll drink to that. That afternoon, Fritz had mentioned a hard ridge inside the dog's collar. Wolfe's eyes had gone bright, and he'd sent for everyone. At 6:20 p.m, Lon Cohen rang. Milton Cass had been found in his office, shot once behind the ear. No witnesses, no weapon, same neat signature. Kramer was already on it and twice as sour as usual. By the time I hung up, Wolfe had decided the talking would be done under our roof. Every chair was occupied except mine, which I'd decided to keep mobile in case somebody fainted, confessed, or tried to make a break for the hall. Wolfe sat behind his desk, monumental as ever, one hand resting on the edge of the mahogany, the other toying with a pencil he didn't need. The air was thick with expectation, cigar smoke, and the kind of silence that feels rehearsed. Across from him sat Inspector Kramer, scowling at the rug as though it owed him an apology. To his right, Elaine Trevelyan and her mother shared a sofa, the younger pale and brittle, the elder dignified in a way that said she'd survived scandal before and didn't like rehearsals. Lila Dawn perched near the window, cigarette trembling between her fingers, every inch the cabaret martyr. Dr. Vera Lang occupied the remaining chair, legs crossed neatly, eyes sharp as new glass. Wolfe had summoned them all, and nobody had dared decline. At the risk of taxing your patience, Wolfe began, I shall recapitulate. I always liked when he said that. It meant the fireworks were about to start. He continued, voice smooth and measured, filling the room the way smoke fills lungs. This case began with theft and ended in blood. Between the two there lies deceit, filial devotion perverted into expedience, and the misuse of an intelligent animal. Elaine flinched. Mrs. Trevelyan stiffened. Kramer's cigar paused mid-air. Wolfe went on. Mr. Trevelyan, faced with the exposure of his fraudulent bond manipulations, attempted to shift responsibility. His daughter, he inclined his head toward Elaine, believed that through concealment she might preserve the family's name and fortune. She and Milton Cass arranged to transfer bearer securities abroad through a most ingenious method, microfilm, hidden within the collar of a Dobermann named Kaiser. The kennels served as courier. Elaine's voice broke the hush. That's absurd. You can't— Silence. Wolfe's tone cracked through the air like a judge's gavel. You will have your turn. He leaned back. But Cass, being more opportunist than partner, sought to exploit the arrangement. He intended to blackmail you, Miss Trevelyan. When your father discovered the plot, he threatened to expose both. Thus he met his death. Later, when Cass persisted, he met his as well. Kramer grunted. You're saying she killed both of them? I do not say, Wolfe replied. I demonstrate. He gestured toward me. I stepped forward with the object resting on a velvet pad, Kaiser's leather collar, the same one Fritz had nearly ruined his manicure scrubbing earlier that afternoon. Wolfe's voice dropped to a quiet weight. Fritz, in the course of his duties, discovered a peculiar stiffness in the lining. He assumed soap residue. I, however, assumed deceit. He lifted the collar and with one deliberate motion peeled back a thin strip of leather to reveal a roll no larger than a cigarette butt, celluloid glinting faintly under the lamp. Microfilm, Wolfe announced, containing photostats of forged transfer documents and Swiss account details in Trevelyan's name. Proof not only of his duplicity but of the method by which it was continued after his death. Lila gasped. Dr. Lang exhaled sharply. Elaine went white. Kramer rose halfway from his chair. Good Lord, Elaine's voice cracked. You can't prove I ever touched that. On the contrary, Wolfe said, the imprint of your signet ring was found upon the collar buckle. I dare say you tightened it yourself after inserting the film. The dog, however, proved an unreliable courier. He was exchanged for another at the kennel, per Dr. Lang's own records, 3 days before Cass's murder. Lang shot to her feet. I had no idea. Cass handled the paperwork. I thought it was a breeding swap. Indeed, Wolfe said mildly, and Miss Trevelyan counted on that ignorance. Mrs. Trevelyan turned to her daughter, horrified. Elaine, tell him he's wrong. For a long second she tried. Her mouth moved, but no words came out. Then the mask cracked, and the truth slid through like smoke from a broken lamp. He was going to ruin us, she said softly. Father said the banks were tightening, that people would talk. Cass wanted half the holdings to keep quiet. I I couldn't let him destroy everything. Wolfe's eyes were cold, not cruel. So you destroyed everyone else instead. Tears streaked her powder. I only wanted to keep the family name alive. He shook his head once, the gesture heavy with finality. You buried it beside your father. Kramer moved in, slow and reluctant. He took out his cigar, ground it dead in the tray, and said in a low growl, Miss Trevelyan, I'm afraid you'll have to come with me. She didn't resist when he put a hand on her arm. Mrs. Trevelyan rose, trembling, then followed them to the door. Lila Dawn stared at the floor. Dr. Lang looked as if she wanted to sterilize the whole room. When the door closed behind them, the silence that followed was like a sigh escaping the walls themselves. I said, well, that wraps up our canine courier service. If Kaiser could talk, he'd probably demand royalties. Wolfe regarded me. Do not be flippant, Archie. The creature was used for corruption as men are. I'll send him a sympathy bone. He ignored that and reached for his beer glass, which Fritz had conveniently left sweating beside the lamp. Mr. Kramer, he said, as the inspector lingered in the doorway. Kramer turned, one eyebrow up. You have my thanks, Wolfe said, for tolerating my interference. Kramer grunted. You earned it. You know, if you weren't so damn immovable, Wolfe, you'd make a fine cop. Wolfe smiled faintly. And if you weren't so mutable, Mr. Kramer, you'd make a tolerable philosopher. That got him, a twitch that might have been a grin. Good night, Wolfe. Goodwin. When he was gone, Wolfe exhaled. Phooey, the man's cigar smoke lingers longer than guilt. I went to the window, watching the police car pull away, its red light fading down 35th Street. The brownstone felt different, emptier maybe, or just quieter now that confession had soaked through the plaster. So, that's that, I said. Another night, another heiress with a complex. Another proof, Wolfe said, that greed is a most adaptable parasite. He rang the bell cord. A moment later, Fritz appeared in the doorway, immaculate as ever. Dinner is served, sir. Excellent, Wolfe murmured, rising. As he crossed to the dining room, I switched off the desk lamp and followed. The case of the Silver Stag was over, but I had a feeling the headlines tomorrow would bark louder than Kaiser ever could. By the time the clock struck 10:30, the brownstone had gone quiet in the kind of way that only comes after a storm, literal or otherwise. The air in Wolfe's office still carried a faint trace of cigar smoke and triumph, though you'd have to be an optimist to call the latter fragrant. The great man himself was seated behind his desk, attending to the serious business of ignoring me. Fritz had just served our customary late-night peace treaty, cold roast beef sliced thin enough to shame a surgeon, horseradish that could melt iron, and 2 glasses of amber beer sweating patiently on silver coasters. It was, in short, a normal evening in a house where normalcy was earned the hard way. Kaiser, the case's 4-legged celebrity, had taken up residence by my feet, sprawled on the rug like he owned it. He'd been cleaned, brushed, and forgiven for past sins. Fritz had taken care of that with more affection than he'd shown most human guests, and Wolfe had grudgingly allowed the beast to remain on condition that he neither bark nor drool. So far, the animal was holding up his end better than most clients. You realize, I said, spearing a piece of beef, that dog's the only witness we've had who didn't try to lie. Wolfe grunted. Animals lack guile because they lack vocabulary. It is no compliment to them. Still, I said, he managed to carry international smuggling evidence better than half the humans we know. You could make him a consulting partner. Call it Wolfe, Goodwin and Hound. He didn't dignify that with a response. He was halfway through his first beer, the glass tilted just so, the foam leaving a ring as neat as a signature. Fritz, hovering by the doorway, smiled faintly, his idea of laughter, before gliding off to the kitchen like a butler-shaped ghost. I leaned back. You know, I think you like the mutt. I tolerate his presence, Wolfe said. That is a concession of magnitude. He looked at you earlier, like he'd found a new idol. I've seen fewer worshipful stares from paying clients. Wolfe sighed, the way a mountain might exhale before an avalanche. Archie, I am not susceptible to flattery, especially from a dog. I respect appetite, not affection. That's funny, I said, because he's been demonstrating both since dinner. He ignored me again, which meant I was on the right track. Kaiser shifted, thumped his tail once, and went back to contemplating his paws. Wolfe drained the rest of his beer and set the glass down with a satisfied click. Seneca observed, he said, that loyalty and appetite are twin virtues, each revealing the capacity for endurance. It is a pity so few men possess either in moderation. Seneca didn't have to pay for dog food, I said, but I'll drink to both anyway. I raised my glass. He inclined his head. Then let us be civilized to loyalty when it is unbought, and appetite when it does not consume reason. Cheers to that, I said, and took a long swallow. The beer was cold enough to forgive the philosophy. Outside, Manhattan hummed faintly, distant traffic washing through the night air. The city had already moved on from the Trevelyan scandal, and by morning it would have found a new villain to occupy its gossip pages. But the brownstone felt suspended in time, preserved in the amber light of the desk lamp and the slow rhythm of Wolfe's breathing. He leaned back, folding his hands across his considerable middle. "You have written the report?" "Typed, carboned and filed. One for Kramer, one for the Gazette, and one for your safe. You could eat off that copy." He nodded approvingly. "Mr. Kramer will require something digestible for his superiors. His superiors, in turn, will require someone to blame for their prior incompetence. I expect his gratitude to be both brief and indigestible." "Speaking of gratitude," I said, "Kramer did promise to call. Probably wants to thank you for making him look efficient." As if on cue, the phone rang. Wolfe raised an eyebrow, and I took it as my cue to answer. "Homicide Bureau, voice of doom," I said cheerfully. Kramer's gravelly growl came through the receiver. "Goodwin, tell your boss I'm calling to admit something." "That he's right?" "That he made my week miserable," Kramer said, "but my report watertight." "Hold on, I'll translate that to human." I covered the mouthpiece. "For you, sir, a confession of reluctant admiration." Wolfe extended a hand, and I passed him the receiver. "Yes, Mr. Kramer," Wolfe said, his tone dry as parchment. "Your candor is, as ever, unvarnished." He listened a moment, then smiled faintly. "Gratitude, sir, is an overrated indulgence. You may keep it for your conscience." There was a pause, then faintly Kramer's low laugh drifted through the line. Wolfe's lips twitched once before he returned the receiver to me. "He said good night," I reported, "and something about owing you a cigar." "Phooey," Wolfe muttered. "He would sooner surrender his badge." "Maybe next Christmas," I said. Wolfe gestured toward the tray. "Finish your meal, Archie. Your body will thank you even if your wit won't." I obliged. The roast beef was perfect, and Fritz's homemade mustard could have revived the dead. Kaiser lifted his head to watch, eyes hopeful. "Sorry, pal," I said. "You've already had your ration. If I feed you table scraps, Wolfe will accuse me of moral sabotage." "I would," Wolfe said solemnly. The clock ticked past 11. The house was warm, the storm outside having settled into a lazy drizzle. The orchid rooms above would be humming softly under their lamps, Theodore Horstman's domain. I'd bet Wolfe was already thinking about tomorrow's tending, even if his face stayed unreadable. "You ever think," I said, "about taking a vacation? Sun, sand, and no corpses." "Vacation," he repeated, as though tasting an unfamiliar word. "From what? Thought?" "From homicide, at least. You could lecture on orchids to polite strangers who don't carry guns," he snorted. "Polite strangers bore me, and guns are rarely aimed well enough to matter." "That's comforting," I said. "I'll put that on our office stationery." He gave me the look that means I'm either amusing or doomed. You may do as you please, within reason. "That's what scares me," I said. He reached for his second beer, signaling with a flick of fingers that Fritz could retire. Then he leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment, the picture of a man perfectly content in his fortress of order. Kaiser shifted again, sighing deeply, and rested his muzzle on my shoe. I looked down at him and said, "You know, he's taking to this place like he owns stock." "He will not remain," Wolfe said without opening his eyes. "He will be returned to the care of Dr. Lang in the morning." "Sure," I said, "but don't tell me you won't miss him." His eyes opened just enough to glint. "Sentimentality, Archie, is a tax on intelligence. I pay no such levy." "Right. I'll remind you of that when you start quoting Seneca again." He made a faint sound that might have been a chuckle or a growl. "Your insolence remains incurable." "That's loyalty," I said. "Unbought, remember?" That earned me a full silence, which from Wolfe counted as a compliment. I finished the last of the beer, letting the comfortable quiet settle. Outside, a siren moaned somewhere uptown. Inside, the brownstone's walls held steady, smelling faintly of food, paper, and orchids. For once, everything fit where it belonged. At 11:27, Wolfe opened one eye again. "Archie?" "Yeah." "See that Kaiser is walked before midnight." "Sure," I said. "Anything for a client?" As I rose, the dog stirred, ready to follow. Fritz reappeared silently with my coat. He'd timed it perfectly, as always. I paused at the doorway. "You know," I said, "for a man who disdains sentiment, you're pretty good at it." He waved me off with the pencil he'd been holding since dinner. "Impertinence. Go." Going. Down on the stoop, the rain had turned into a soft drizzle. Kaiser trotted beside me like a creature who knew the world had finally stopped asking him to keep secrets. The city gleamed wet and forgiving. He'd go back to Dr. Lang at first light, but for tonight, he'd earned his place on the rug. When we came back, Wolfe hadn't moved. The beer glass was empty, the lamplight steady, and order had resumed its throne. I looked around the office, the old rug under my feet, the faint marks of our latest misadventure still clinging to the edges of normal life, and said what seemed fitting. The Dobermann got his walk, Wolfe got his beer, and I got the bill for new carpet. Everybody wins, almost.